Captain Jace Merrick never expected his final mission to end on a forgotten moon, light years from Earth, surrounded by the wreckage of two armies that never should have met. His dropship had taken a direct hit during re-entry, and now smoke rose from its broken hull like a signal fire for predators. The battlefield was silent, choked in dust and static from ruined machines. His armor, cracked and bleeding from the side, limped through the shattered remains of what had once been a grand temple carved from crystal and stone. His HUD flickered with dying light, sensors failing, and comms long since dead. He wasn't sure what had drawn him inside. Maybe instinct, maybe the faint pulse his scanner picked up, one so weak it barely registered. At the heart of the temple, beneath a crumbled arch and glowing fragments, he found her, a Valari, barely breathing, her silver skin marked with wounds and her violet blood pooling around her body like liquid light. Kay had seen her species in briefings telepathic, proud, and deeply isolationist. This one, judging by the ornate crest on her shattered armor, was royalty. A princess. Sarava Valari, though he wouldn't know her name until later, lay dying in silence. Jace knelt beside her, checking vitals. Her pulse was erratic, shallow. Breathing came in gasps, every one of them weaker than the last. His medkit blinked. Read her physiology was incompatible with human medicine. No known blood match. No transfusion possible. And yet, as he watched her eyes flutter open for a heartbeat of time, panic and pain etched across her delicate features. Something inside him told him to try. It wasn't logic. It wasn't training. It was something older, deeper. He knew she would die in minutes without intervention. Ignoring protocol and probability, Jace connected the transfusion line from his suit to her arm, bypassing every safety. The machine screamed a warning biological mismatch. He overrode it. As the first drop of human blood entered her veins, nothing happened. Then everything did. Her body jerked as if shocked by lightning, eyes flying open fully for the first time, glowing with a light not entirely her own. Jace pulled back, unsure whether he had saved her or killed her faster. Her gaze locked on his, and in that moment, a presence touched his mind, not a voice, but a feeling, like warm wind over ice, ancient and unfamiliar. He stumbled backward, heart racing, as her wounds began to heal before his eyes, the blood mixing and glowing brighter. She sat up slowly, as if waking from a dream, and whispered something in her native tongue. He didn't understand it, but the meaning reached him somehow. Why? He didn't have an answer. She looked around, confused, afraid, then back at him. And this time her words were clearer, as if his mind was adjusting. You are, ... not Valari, yet I feel you. Jace shook his head, dazed. You were dying. I had to try. The connection between them sparked again, stronger now, like a thread of thought he could feel pulling at his own. She winced, suddenly, holding her head. Jace reached out, but stopped short. Are you all right? He asked. She looked at her hands, flexing them. I should be dead, she murmured. Your blood, ... It should have ended me. They sat in silence as the broken temple groaned under distant tremors. The storm outside was rising, and with it came danger. He had to move, but she could barely stand. He helped her up carefully, surprised at how light she was, how steady her breathing had become. Every time they touched, that strange link between them pulsed stronger, like two voices learning how to speak the same language. As they exited the ruins into the gray light of Lunareth's shattered sky, they saw movement in the distant figures in shadow. Not human, not Valari, something else. Jace tightened his grip on his rifle, but Sarava reached out. No weapons, she said. Tay will feel your intent. He hesitated, then nodded. Okay? The figures drew closer, shifting like mist, but passed without notice, as if blind to their presence. Jace exhaled slowly, glancing at her. "That was you, wasn't it?" She didn't answer, but he saw a faint smile touch her lips. They moved through the crystal forest beyond the temple, each step taking them deeper into mystery. He couldn't explain why he felt stronger, faster, even though he was bleeding. And he noticed her recovering more with every moment, almost glowing now, as though his blood was reshaping her from within. "This isn't supposed to happen," she said suddenly. "The bond, ... It's ancient, forbidden." Jace frowned. "What bond?" Serva looked at him then, not with fear, but with wonder. "You gave life," she whispered, "and in return, something awakens. We are ... linked." Jace didn't know what to say. He'd been a soldier all his life. He'd saved people before, but this felt different. This felt ... faded. As the night fell and stars blinked into view above the battlefield, the air shimmered with tension. Somewhere in the distance, ships burned in orbit. The war was far from over. But in that moment, under a dead sky, a human warrior and an alien princess sat side by side in silence, bloodbound by an act of impossible mercy. And far above them, something old and long forgotten stirred in the dark. The forest of crystal trees shimmered in the dim light of Lunareth's twin moons as Captain Jace Merrick helped Princess Serva walk through the jagged landscape. There, steps quiet but heavy with uncertainty, the bond between them, born from blood and desperation, pulsed stronger with every breath, though neither of them fully understood what it meant or what it would become. Jace's mind was still reeling from the strange feelings. He kept sensing moments of clarity that weren't his own, flickers of emotion that came from Serva's presence even before she spoke, like silent whispers reaching across some invisible thread, and he could feel her fear, her confusion, and something else too, something old, as if her body carried memories not just of her life, but of her entire people. Serva said little as they moved, but her eyes often drifted toward him, not with suspicion, but curiosity, as though she was seeing something impossible that both frightened and fascinated her. She had once been taught that humans were blunt instruments, warriors without depth, but now the blood of one ran through her veins, and it was changing her in ways she could not control. They found shelter beneath an overhanging rock formation where broken Valari glyphs were etched into the stone, glowing faintly at their presence. And as Jace examined them, Sarava whispered that they were warning phrases that spoke of ancient laws, forbidden unions, and the danger of bonded blood. He asked what that meant, but she hesitated, choosing her words carefully as she explained how the Valari once shared a deeper connection with other races long before the wars began, a time erased from memory by their own leaders out of fear and shame. Bonds like theirs were rare and unnatural because they awakened powers buried deep in the Valari mind powers that hadn't been seen in thousands of years. Jace listened, trying to stay calm as Serva described the symptoms: increased strength, shared thoughts, and eventually the merging of abilities that made the bonded pair something more than either species alone. He looked at his hands, remembering how he'd sensed those cloaked figures earlier. How he moved faster, clearer, even while injured. It hadn't been adrenaline. It had been something else. Suddenly, Sarva gasped and clutched her head, collapsing against the stone wall as her body trembled. Jace rushed to her side, feeling a surge of panic, not entirely his own. Hey. In the moment he touched her, images flooded his mind, flashes of fire, of a great starship splitting apart in orbit, of Valari warriors falling in slow motion as a shadow consumed the skies. He staggered back, heart pounding, realizing he had seen her memories without meaning to. Sarava stared at him in shock, her voice shaking as she asked, "You saw it?" He nodded slowly, both afraid and amazed, and she whispered, "Bond is growing too fast." Before they could speak further, a shriek echoed through the forest sharp and in natural land. Jace instinctively pulled her behind cover, scanning the trees as shapes began to move in the distance. Valari soldiers in sleek armor stepped into view, their helmets shaped like birds of prey, and their leader, a tall figure with a glowing staff, shouted in their tongue, demanding Sarava be turned over for purification. Ata stood protectively in front of her, raising his rifle, but Serva stepped forward, lifting her hand with effort, trying to reason with them. The leader removed his helmet, revealing a face lined with silver scars and glowing eyes full of disgust. "You carry human blood," he said coldly. "You are no longer Valari." Sarava replied with dignity, "That blood saved my life." But the soldiers advanced, and Jace could feel her sorrow as if it were his own. She knew they would not listen. Without thinking, he fired a warning shot that exploded near the commander's feet, forcing them to scatter, and the forest erupted in chaos as crystal trees cracked and energy blasts lit the shadows. Sarava grabbed Jace's hand, and as they ran, the bond between them sparked again, not with pain, but strength, guiding their path, helping them dodge attacks they couldn't see with their eyes alone. After what felt like hours, they reached an abandoned Valari outpost, where Sarava collapsed, exhausted and breathing heavily, her body trembling from the strain of the escape. Jace tended to her, unsure how to help, when she looked up at him, with eyes glowing brighter than before, and whispered, "I'm changing, and so are you." He looked at his reflection in a cracked screen. His pupils had rings of violet now, and his skin shimmered faintly under the right light. She told him this was just the beginning. The bond would not stop unless broken, and breaking it could kill them both. As they rested, Sarava explained more. Valari lore spoke of a prophecy, one long banned from being spoken, about a warrior of another world whose blood would awaken the first thread, a link strong enough to restore the forgotten union of minds and hearts that once connected the stars. She had never believed in myths, but now, sitting beside a human whose thoughts she could feel even before he spoke, she wasn't so sure. Suddenly, the screen on the wall flickered to life with an emergency broadcast. Jace recognized the symbols as Concord command protocols. He tapped into it and saw a bounty notice, his face listed as a biohazard, wanted for the unlawful transfer of alien genetics, marked as a Class 5 anomaly. They weren't just being hunted by Valari zealots. Now he was a target of the entire galactic Concord. Jay swore under his breath, realization sinking in that this wasn't just about saving Sarava anymore. This was bigger, stranger, and more dangerous than he had ever imagined. Sarava looked at the screen, then back at him. "They fear what we are becoming," she said quietly. Jace nodded. "Then we find out why." As the outpost lights flickered and silence returned, the bond between them pulsed again stronger. Deep run in that still moment, two enemies became something else entirely. The bond shouldn't exist, but it did. And nothing in the galaxy would ever be the same. The wind howled softly through the hollow halls of the ancient Valari archive as Jace and Sarava stepped cautiously into the darkness, their only light coming from the glowing threads along the walls that responded to her touch, pulsing gently like living veins. They had traveled for 2 days through broken forests and ruined cities, following fragments of memory that Serva claimed were not hers alone, but belonged to voices from the past, now awakened inside her since the bond began to grow. Jace had started to feel them two strange dreams, whispers in the back of his mind, and flashes of places he had never seen but somehow recognized. And now those echoes had led them here, deep beneath the surface of a forgotten Valari city, swallowed long ago by war and time. Sarava's movements were slower now, her body changing more each hour as the blood bond pushed her beyond anything her people had known in centuries. Her skin had begun to shimmer with faint patterns that shifted like starlight, and her voice sometimes carried power that made the very air hum. Jace stayed close, watching her, guarding her, not just because she needed him, but because he felt something drawing him to her. It's an invisible pull that tied their fates together, tighter each day. At the heart of the archive stood a large, sealed chamber marked with ancient glyphs neither of them could read. But Sarva placed her palm against the stone, and it melted away like mist, revealing a hidden room filled with floating crystals, and a massive central pillar that pulsed like a heartbeat. As they stepped inside, the room reacted instantly. Lights flared to life, and the crystals began to spin slowly, projecting images in the air. Humans and Valari standing side by side, sharing knowledge, fighting together, not as enemies, but as allies. Jace watched in disbelief as one of the images showed an ancient ceremony to figures, one clearly human, Kayla, Valari's joining hands as their blood mixed into a glowing stream. "It's real," Sarava whispered, eyes wide with shock. "The alliance they erased. It was built on this." She reached out and touched one of the spinning crystals. Suddenly, a surge of visions flooded both of them, fleets flying under a shared banner. Cities where human and Valari children played together in a time of peace built on understanding, and a shared secret that their species could bond through blood. Not just physically, but mentally and spiritually, becoming something greater. But the vision darkened as fear took hold. Jealous leaders, frightened elders, and the rise of those who saw the bond as a threat to power and purity. The alliance was shattered from within, history rewritten, and the bond declared forbidden. As the vision ended, Sarava fell to her knees, overwhelmed, and Jace caught her just in time, feeling a sharp pain in his head like a warning. The bond had taken them too deep, and now something had noticed. The pillar in the center of the room began to crack, releasing a high-pitched sound that shook the walls. "We triggered a defense system," Jace said, pulling Sarava to her feet. "This place doesn't want us here." They ran as the chamber collapsed behind them, the ground shaking and debris crashing around their heels. Once they reached the surface, Sarava pointed to the sky. Valari ships were descending, and they were not friendly. "The council knows we've seen the truth," she said, her voice trembling. "They won't let us leave alive." Jace checked his weapon, his body aching with strange energy that hadn't been there days ago. "Then we don't let them stop us." They ran through the ruins, dodging drone patrols and slipping past scanning lights, guided not by sight, but by the link between them, which now pulsed like a second heartbeat in Jace's chest. They found shelter in a broken communications tower, where Sarava used old tech to send out a coded signal, not to the Valari, but to anyone who still remembered the old alliance, if any remained. As the night fell and the stars filled the sky above, Sarava leaned against Jace, her voice softer now. "The bond is not just a gift, it's a message from the past, a call to restore what was broken." Jace looked at her, at the strange glow in her eyes, and the way he could feel her thoughts even before she spoke, and he knew she was right. But he also knew they were running out of time. The vision had shown something else, too, something watching from beyond the stars. Something that once feared the bond, and still did. The broken alliance hadn't just been destroyed by internal fear, but by a silent enemy that moved in shadows and had waited for the bond to die forever. Now that it had returned, they would come again. And Jace realized with growing dread that he and Sarava were no longer just bonded. They were a signal, a spark, and the galaxy was beginning to stir. The cold winds of the desert moonscape howled as Jace and Sarava stood at the edge of a deep canyon carved by time and war, staring down at the ancient structure hidden below an enormous ring of stone and light. known only in Valari legend as the Trial of Unity, a place once used to test those who carried the bond between species, where the original alliance had been sealed in blood and truth, and where, long ago, it had been broken by fear. Neither of them knew exactly what waited inside, only that the echoes of their shared vision had led them here, pulling them forward with every step since escaping the archive. Serva's transformation had become impossible to hide. Her skin now shimmered with shifting patterns of violet and silver, and her eyes glowed faintly, even in darkness. Her voice, when she spoke, carried weight that could make the ground vibrate, or the wind still, and she often knew Jace's thoughts before he said them. Jace, too, had changed. He no longer tired easily, could see in dim light, and his instincts were sharp beyond reason, allowing him to react before danger even arrived. The bond had grown deeper, fusing not just their thoughts, but their very energy, and though it gave them strength, it also came with risk, for if one of them fell, the other might collapse too. The path into the trial was marked by glowing symbols that only Sarava could read, and as they stepped through the gate, the world outside vanished behind them, replaced by an enormous chamber filled with floating platforms, endless mist, and a sky that looked like a living memory. The first challenge came without warning. Shadows, shaped like people, emerged from the mist, moving fast, striking silently, testing their unity. Jace fought beside Sarava, their movements in perfect sync, as though they had trained together for years, every step and strike flowing like one mind in two bodies. The shadows whispered lies, each trying to break their bond, telling Sarava that Jace would betray her, telling Jace that Sarava's kind had started the war that killed his squad, but they ignored the voices, leaning on the trust they had, built through blood, silence, and survival. When the last shadow fell, the mists parted, revealing the next trial chamber of light and reflection, where the air hummed with power. In this place, they were shown versions of themselves. Jace, alone and broken on a battlefield, his humanity lost to anger and violence. Sarava, ruling over a hollow empire, cold and distant, her heart locked behind walls of pride. They had to face these images, not fight them, but accept them, acknowledge the fears and truths hidden inside. Sarva stepped forward first, placing her hand on the cold reflection of her future self, whispering, "I am not afraid to feel," and the image vanished in a burst of light. Jace hesitated, staring into the eyes of the soldier he could become, one who had nothing left but war. But then he turned to Sarva, saw the bond they shared, and stepped forward. "I choose more than survival," he said, and the chamber responded with warmth, as if approving their choice. A third gate opened, and now they stood in a circular room surrounded by pillars, where a tall figure waited, neither Valari nor human, but something older, wrapped in cloth and shadow, its voice deep, like thunder rolling through stone. "You carry the bond," it said, "but do you carry its truth?" It told them the final trial was not about strength or vision, but trust. One must fall, and the other must choose to save themselves or save their bonded one, risking both lives. Sarava turned to Jace, her expression calm. "It should be me," she said. "My people broke the first bond. Let me take the risk." Jace shook his head. "This bond exists because I broke every rule to save you. It's my fault we're hunted. I won't ask you to fall." But before either could act, the floor beneath them split, and Jace fell into a pit of light, vanishing from sight. Sarava cried out and rushed forward, only to be met by the shadowed figure again. "Now you choose," it said. "Walk through the gate alone, and you live, reborn as the first of a new Valari path. Or leap after him and risk all for the unknown." Her hands trembled, the bond inside her burning hot, calling to him even now. She looked toward the gate, glowing softly with promise. Then back at the pit. "He gave life to me. she whispered. Now, I give it back. Without hesitation, she jumped, vanishing into the light. For a moment, everything went still then. The chamber trembled, and the ring above them flared with blinding brightness. Akis opened his eyes to find Sarava beside him. The two of them floating in a space of stars and memory, the voice now inside both of them. You have passed, not because you chose survival, but because you chose each other. The trial of unity faded, and the desert returned, the sky above calmer than before. Their bond was complete now, no longer growing, but alive, stable and powerful, connecting them not just to each other, but to the hidden energy that once linked their peoples. As they stepped away from the canyon, ships could be seen in the distance, Valari and Concord forces closing in. But Jace and Sarava no longer felt fear. The trial had given them more than truth. It had given them purpose. And whatever came next, they would face it together. The sky above Lunareth burned with shades of violet and red as the enemy fleet descended, casting long shadows over the glass-like towers of the city that stood as the last neutral ground between the Valari and the human Concord. The city was ancient, older than either empire, and had survived war, peace, and silence for thousands of years. But now it was on the edge of destruction as Jace and Sarava arrived through the eastern gates, guided by the bond that throbbed, like a warning in their minds, telling them that time was running out. The people of Lunareth had heard rumors of the bonded pair, a human warrior and a Valari princess who had survived the old archives, who had passed the trial of unity, and who now carried a power that neither side could control. And those rumors had made the council afraid. Valari elders, once wise and calm, now stared with cold eyes filled with fear, while the Concord generals sharpened their weapons and prepared to strike, unwilling to believe that one of their own had bonded with the enemy. Jace and Sarava moved through tense streets filled with soldiers and civilians, watched closely by drones that hovered overhead and spies that lurked in the alleys. But they kept going, driven by the vision they had seen at the heart of the trial of something ancient and terrible that would come if the bond was destroyed again, of an enemy that once wiped out entire worlds when the first alliance was broken. They reached the Hall of Voices, where leaders of both species sat in uneasy silence. And Sarava stepped forward, her voice clear and strong as she told them the truth, not just of the bond, but of the forgotten history, the erased alliance, the lies told to keep their people apart, and the real threat that waited beyond the stars, watching for weakness. Some listened, their faces pale with shock, while others rose in anger, calling them traitors and fakes, claiming the bond was a trick to unite enemies and bring war. A vote was called, not for peace, but for capture. Both Sarava and Jace were to be taken into custody until further review, but they did not go quietly. As guards closed in, Jace reached for his weapon, and Sarava raised her hand, releasing a pulse of energy that froze every light in the chamber for 3 seconds, just enough time for them to run. The city alarms began to howl, and the chase started. Across rooftops and through glowing tunnels, they ran. Hunted, not just by soldiers, but by machines programmed to kill without hesitation. The bond kept them moving as one, their thoughts and actions synced, each protecting the other without needing to speak. They reached the central tower of Lunareth, just as the first shots from the fleet above struck the outer defenses, sending shockwaves through the ground. The siege had begun. Sturba's hands glowed with energy, and she tapped into the tower's communication core, sending a signal not just to the Valari and Concord forces, but to all nearby systems, activating an ancient beacon left from the First Alliance. A call for any who remembered the bond to come. As the message spread, the tower shook again, and enemy troops stormed in, led by a Concord captain who had once fought beside Jace. The man raised his rifle, demanding surrender, but hesitated when he saw Sirov's face, saw the glow in Jace's eyes, and heard the strange hum in the air. "What are you?" he asked. Jace looked at Serva, then answered, "Something new, something old, something this galaxy forgot." The hesitation bought them a few seconds more, and Sarava unleashed a shield of light that pushed the attackers back, allowing them to escape through a hidden shaft that led to the city's underbelly. Below, in the old tunnels, where the first humans in Valari once traded knowledge, they found allies, outcasts, rebels, scientists who believed the stories and had waited for the bond to return. They gave Jace and Sarava weapons, maps, and most of all, hope. The group planned to counterattack, not to win the siege, but to delay it long enough for others to arrive, for the old signal to bring help. As night fell, Lunareth burned brighter, and the sky was full of fire. The defenders fought bravely, using every piece of old tech and new energy to hold the walls. Serva led with fierce power, her bond with Jace allowing her to strike with both mind and matter, sending waves of force through metal and air, turning attackers back with precision. Jace moved like a shadow, fast and silent, his human instincts sharpened by the Valari link, always one step ahead of danger. But the enemy was many, and the hours passed like storms. The tower they had escaped to began to crack, and Jace was wounded, a deep cut across his side that made him stagger. Sarava held him up, tears in her eyes, but he smiled weakly. "We've come too far to fall now," he said, and she nodded, placing her hand on his chest. The bond glowed brighter, and for a moment his wound closed, not fully healed, but enough to keep going. Then, just as the last wall of Lunareth was about to break, something changed. A new fleet appeared in the sky ships, bearing an old symbol, a circle of light and shadow, the mark of the First Alliance. The message had been heard. Reinforcements arrived, not from the Concord or the Valari, but from forgotten colonies, where humans and Valari still lived together in secret harmony. They came with weapons powered by unity, by science shared through blood and trust. And they struck the enemy from above with a strength neither side had seen in generations. The siege turned, slowly, painfully, but it turned. By dawn, Lunareth still stood, damaged, cracked, burning but standing. Jace and Sarava stood on the highest tower, watching the smoke rise and the stars return to the sky. "This was never just about us," Sarva said quietly. "It was about reminding the galaxy what we were meant to be." Jace nodded, his hand finding hers, in what we still can be. But deep in the distance, beyond the edge of sight, a shadow moved, something ancient and cold, awakened by the bond's return and the beacon's light. The true enemy was coming, and the final battle had not yet begun. The skies above Lunareth were quiet, but it was the kind of silence that felt heavy, the kind that held its breath before the storm returned. And as the sun rose behind the broken towers, Jace and Sarava stood before the gathered leaders of both Concord and Valari, their faces marked by war and truth, ready to speak one last time before the world changed forever. For the signal Sarava had sent from the trial had not only reached forgotten allies, it had awakened something ancient and watching, something buried in darkness beyond the stars that had once been stopped by the first human Valari alliance, and now stirred again, because that bond had been reborn. And though the siege of Lunareth was over, the real war was still to come. The gathered council was no longer filled with disbelief or denial. Not after what they had witnessed, the two fighting as one, the impossible defense of a city fated to fall, and the arrival of ships bearing the mark of unity, long thought lost hand. Now they listened, some with fear, some with hope, as Sarava stepped forward and spoke of what she had seen in the deep mind link during the trial. A force not of flame or metal, but of silence, an ancient hunger called the Void Dwellers, creatures that fed on broken alliances, that whispered lies across galaxies and watched planets crumble from within. She explained that when the first bond was destroyed, it had given them an opening, and they had nearly consumed all the Valari homeworlds, pushing them to retreat and hide the truth. While the Concord had buried the same memories beneath false victories and rewritten reports, Jace then took a deep breath and told his story of how he had found Sarava dying, how his decision to give her his blood had changed them both, not just in body but in spirit, creating something new, not Valari, not human, but both. The silence that followed was deep, but it was broken by an old Concord general who stood slowly and looked around the room. "Okay, if the old bond saved us once," he said, voice rough, "then perhaps the new one can save us again." And from there, the talks began, not of surrender, not of pride, but of a pact, one that would stand above borders, armies, and names. They called it the Dawnfire Pact, forged under the first sun to rise after the siege, a promise between those who believed that only together could they stop the Void Dwellers, and both sides agreed to give command of the new alliance to Jace and Sarava, not as rulers, but as guides, as proof that the bond was not weakness, but strength. Even as the pact was signed, the stars flickered unnaturally in the sky, and far-off sensors screamed as strange ships appeared at the edge of known space, moving without heat or sound, blinking through dimensions like ghost signs that the Void Dwellers were coming. The final battle would not be fought on one world, but across many, and the pact needed more than signatures. It needed action. So Sarava and Jace boarded the first hybrid ship built from both Concord steel and Valari crystal, a vessel powered by harmony, and set off toward the outer rim, where the first sign of the coming threat had been detected. Their mission was simple but deadly: activate the 5 ancient star beacons left behind by the original alliance. Devices strong enough to form a shield across the galaxy if awakened in unison, but each one was hidden on a world lost to time, or occupied by forces that had fallen under Void Dweller influence. The first beacon was buried deep beneath a frozen moon called Kareth, where the Void Dwellers had twisted the minds of settlers into hollow-eyed servants, their bodies moving like puppets. Jace and Sarava landed in silence, navigating icy caves, where whispers filled the air, trying to break their bond by turning them against each other with lies. But the two moved forward, trusting not just the bond, but the choices they had made. And when they reached the beacon, Sarava touched the console with her glowing hand, activating the first light. A pulse of warmth spread across space, a signal that the pact had begun to awaken. The second beacon lay inside a dead star, its core hidden by violent magnetic storms, and only the bond allowed them to move through it safely, their joint energies shielding the ship as they found the ancient core and restarted the systems buried there for thousands of years. One by one, they lit the beacons, but the Void Dwellers moved faster, destroying outposts, infecting systems, sending dark matter storms to erase planets from existence. By the time they reached the 5th and final beacon, they found it guarded by a massive entity, Void Dweller, shaped like a nightmare. Its body made of shifting shadows and broken light, and it spoke directly into their minds, promising safety, power, even peace, if they would just abandon the pact. Jace nearly faltered, hearing the voice of his lost squad in the whisper, while Sarava saw visions of her fallen sisters reaching for her. But in that moment, they turned to each other, their hands clasped, and their bond flared brighter than ever before. Together, they stepped forward, ignoring the fear, and activated the final beacon, releasing a wave of light that shattered the Void Dweller's form and sent a shock through the dark network spread across space. The shield formed, glowing across systems like a golden net, holding the darkness at bay, for now. As they returned to Lunareth, their ship worn and their bodies tired, They were met by silence and then cheers, voices from every corner of the rebuilt city, shouting in unity. The Dawnfire Pact had held. The war was not over, but the tide had turned. Kenta, in the bond that began with a single act of kindness and human giving blood to an enemy princess, had grown into a power that could hold back even the oldest evils of the universe. Jace looked at Sarava, who stood at his side, her eyes reflecting stars and hope, and he smiled, knowing that the story of humanity in Valari would no longer be one of war, but of what came after.